The loose title on the day of this recording is The Playbook to Understanding This WordPress Thing. Use the chapters, use the timestamps, jump around, find a piece of information that's important to you, and Brian and I will do our best to break that particular topic down. I wouldn't say this is for the beginner type who's trying to learn how to use WordPress, but this is for the person coming into the WordPress community trying to understand what I've been calling the apparatus of things, like this whole thing that we're so passionate about and the different points of interest along the way. That's our attempt today. Thumbs up if you like the video. Subscribe to the channel if you want more. And Brian, before we go too deep into where can folks find you on the web?
Yeah, just my name, briancords.com, and there you have YouTube and Twitter, the most kind of active places where I am right now.
A lot of the stuff goes well beyond WordPress, which starts with our first topic, and that's open source. Like open source, the thing of open source. I'll start with just how I got into open source. And this is what really unlocked it for me to understand the value in it. Years and years ago, I was a Circuit City salesperson selling computers. Back in that time, people would walk in and buy software off of a shelf. Would walk up to it, pick up a box, and go to the checkout and buy it. And I remember a gentleman coming in and purchasing, we were selling NEC computers back then. I don't know if that brand still exists. They might make calculators, but there was an NEC computer, a range of them. And it was the cheapest computer that we had. And we had a bunch of them that were open box refurbished. People would always return them, right? Because there was always these issues. Guy walked in and said, I want the cheapest computer that you have. He's like, I don't care about Windows. I'm running something called Linux. And I was like, what is this man doing with this operating system called Linux that's going to run much more efficiently than Windows? I didn't even know there was an alternative to Windows and Mac at the time that an end user could use. And I went to another legacy thing, Barnes & Noble's. I bought the Linux Guide for Dummies, or it was maybe called the Linux Bible. And it came with a copy of Mandrake Linux or the open source Red Hat version at the time. And that unlocked this whole world of open source stuff. Not only was Linux open source and the core kernel that operated the computer and the operating system, that is what really exposed me to this world of WordPress, PHP Nuke, PHP Bulletin Board, Drupal, and this was a whole, deluge of software that I was exposed to in the day. But open source, quite literally meaning the code is open. There's many different licenses, which we're not going to get all into, but we'll talk about WordPress's license in a second. But it just exposed this whole world of alternative software that is open, that can be manipulated by others, shared, downloaded, accessed, etc. And that's what got me eventually into WordPress. That's my entry into open source and how I kind of see it. What are your thoughts on open source? It's a huge topic.
Yeah, I mean, I think I came the other way where I was just remembering this the other day. When I was younger, somebody gave me a burned CD with a bunch of software on it. It was like music editing software. And it was like, take the CD and like copy the, the stuff to your computer. And I think we did a lot of illegal downloading of music was like, really the peak and stuff like that. And so the idea that software should be free financially was always kind of part of my experience. And then it wasn't until later, as I was using WordPress, when I started to understand that like the price of the software has nothing really to do with the open source nature of the software. It's kind of an advantage that the software is available for free, but that's not really the point of what it meant to be open source. And once I started understanding that concept, that like, no, it's not about you didn't pay for it. It's about you own it. You can change it. You control it. You can look under the hood. Then I started understanding, oh, okay, that's open source. That's what it means. That's the community. That's what people are really excited about.
If you're wondering like, okay, how does Automattic play into this? We're going to get to that. This is in no particular order. Again, just use the chapters. This is a lot of stuff here. And Brian and I are just like doing this as like a fireside chat of these interesting waypoints across the WordPress community. WordPress in particular runs on GPL version 2 or V2, GPL V2 or later from the Free Software Foundation, wordpress.org/about/license. If you want to check that GNU public license, that's how I've always said that, GNU, GNU public license. This is what affords us that ability to download, access, modify WordPress and attribute back to, or contribute back to the WordPress ecosystem. The GPL license does. If Automattic ever came in and said, you know what, we're going to influence this project a lot more. We're going to take this whole better WordPress thing in-house. We're going to have our own commercial version of WordPress. We're not going to do this open source thing anymore. At that moment, this is how I see it, and you let me know what you think about this, Brian. This is how I see it. If it happened right now, we'd have WordPress version 6.6.3 under the GPL. We would sort of like freeze in time right there and say, we can fork that as a community. Like, we can continue WordPress even if Automattic or somebody else took WordPress from us, with air quotes. We could say, because of the GPL, this last version, the last lines of code committed to this WordPress thing is under GPL, and the community could either just continue building it right there in that repo, perhaps, or somebody could just say, you know what, let's fork it into this other repo, and we'll just continue to build it here. That's the 50,000 foot view. That's the safety net that I see in all of this. Fair statement, or do you have some nuances there?
Well, when I think of WordPress, I kind of break it down into like the software that you literally run, but then there's what other people call like the community, all the plugins, the ecosystem, the way that hosting companies are bought in. And then there's this third thing that's the infrastructure, because when you were describing like installing Linux and stuff, that's like a very tinkery, hackery kind of thing that you would learn how to do. But what WordPress, I think, shifted was the famous 5-minute install, where you didn't have to understand how the software ran to benefit from it being open source. Whereas a lot of other open source stuff is still really technical, requires that extra development. WordPress, on the other hand, I log into WordPress. If there's an update, I click a button, I get an update. Like, that's not actually a normal thing. A lot of open source software, when you want to update your Node.js server or whatever, it's painstaking. But WordPress adds the simplicity on top of it. But that's not the core software. That's the apparatus. That's the plugin directory. That's the updates. That's all this other stuff. So yes, you can take your WordPress and you can fork it and you can own it forever, and nobody can ever take that away from you the way that they can take away your Facebook page or something like that. So that is very critical. But would 42% of the web get together and keep the apparatus running? That's, I don't know. I don't know if a real fork of WordPress would exist, but that doesn't really matter when you personally can own your fork of it. And that's the crucial distinction I see. Even if WordPress itself goes away, your own website can always be taken care of.
The top of the license page. So if you do go to wordpress.org/about/license and you click into read the text of the license here at the GNU.org, gnu.org, you can read about GPL 2.0. Version 2, June 1991. I don't think Mark Szymanski was even a twinkle in his parents' eyes at that time. So June 1991, this kind of licensing was, and I'm sure it's been iterated on a little bit after that, but that's when it was first conceived. So I don't even pretend to know what licensing it's still on or what version that stuff is still on, but there are many different versions of licensing out there. And it all, from what I know, is it's going to change the way you can either distribute it, how you attribute it back to original creators or source or something like that. And can you use it in like a commercial setting,
And what can you do with it? Like with WordPress, one other thing is if you change it, you technically have to open source your changed version. Like that's part of the agreement you make with WordPress, is not just that you can change it, but that you're then going to share those changes publicly for other people. So that's also a big difference too. It's like self-perpetuating open source.
In my head, I'm thinking, yeah, this is this is a formality that could actually hold up in a court of law. Am I even correct in thinking that? Do you even
I feel like it's never been tested, except for there is that kind of infamous WordPress theme. Do themes have to be open source? Do plugins have to be open source? Can they hide their code, right? And that was a big debate back in the what was the theme company, Revolution or something? I don't know if you remember what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But I think from last I've heard, I don't think it's ever really been tested. And so I would be curious to see if that would even hold up. But that, technically that's part of it.
Yeah. All right, let's transition into one of the biggest issues. And again, we're just kind of speed running this, but we'll try to break it down as best as possible. Let's talk about the beginnings of WordPress. There's a lot of hype cycle right now. What is WordPress? Why does it do this? Why haven't they done that? Why are we going in this direction? WordPress started as a fork of B2 Cafe. Was it Blog or Log?
I think Log.
Log.
I think it's Cafe Log.
Cafe Log. And that was something that I think Matt started tinkering with, and then Mike Little was like, oh, I'll help you with that. That's like the fast version of that. And it started as its own fork of that software and just compounded immensely over time. Again, we're not going to go into each little sort of era of WordPress and every year that it iterated on, but that was the essence of it. It was like two chaps came together, saw something that they both agreed with and identified as, I would love a better blogging system to get these words out onto the internet, which was super young back then. And literally that was the first stone set in place, which is why we have a lot of legacy things in there, like the concept of publishing and blog first and blog-centric software, which is obviously being challenged 20 years later. But 20 years in tech terms is like 500 years, in my opinion, right?
Yeah.
In dog years. Because, man, this technology changes so fast, and this has been able to remain steadfast across 2 decades in many iterations of the internet and technology. So that's how it started in my eyes, and the evolution is where we're at today, where yes, it's much more of a content management system, website building platform, but the essence of this thing started as a blogging tool many years ago.
When I started in WordPress, pages were already there because that was a new that was not part of the original concept that you could just have a page. It was just a blog feed. And I think custom post types were already, but they were maybe the new thing, I think, was when I started using WordPress. But I got introduced to WordPress because of a client saying, hey, you built me this website, but I can't edit it. Why didn't you use something like a WordPress? And I like the fact that the client said it to me is pretty bad, but I just was a beginner. And so already, and that was, much more than a decade ago, a little more than a decade ago. So that was already, once custom post types and pages and stuff were there, already people were saying, oh, I can use this to build my website, not I can use this to build my blog. And I feel like that second decade of WordPress has been this constant tension between those two things. Is it to build websites? Is it to build not even blogs, but the New York Times, TechCrunch, now The Onion was a new one. Vox is coming back. Publications, newsrooms, local news is a huge area. But these are publishers versus can I just build my website with it? And so a lot of people really didn't come into it as a blogging tool, and they really, like you said, that's this new kind of debate, but it's really been the last 10 years. Like, why is blogging still the center of it? But that is its history.
I was quickly trying to search for, was B2 Cafe Log open source under the GPL? The Wikipedia page just goes right to WordPress. Funny enough, there is actually a great break. In all the years I've been covering this WordPress stuff, I've never looked at the Wikipedia page for WordPress up until this moment right now. They do have a nice chronological timeline of starting back at version 0.7, May 27th, 2003. And then they have the whole catalog of release dates and project names, or code names. Codename first one was Davis 1.0, January 3rd, 2004. Interesting enough. Next item on the list is Matt Mullenweg. Like I said, this is in no particular order. The first few start out in a particular order, like open source, GPL, WordPress. Matt started WordPress with Mike Little, but Matt Mullenweg now, the guy in the spotlight all the time, as it's known in the WordPress space, runs Automattic, for all intents and purposes, runs WordPress, and wears many hats. Right? Here's a guy who is under constant scrutiny, but also brought us this amazing piece of software and ushered in the community as we know it today. Obviously, we wouldn't be doing any of this stuff if it weren't for him and Mike Little getting this thing off the ground, but certainly this commercial side of WordPress, and many years after, Matt has really, been not only the figurehead of WordPress, but also, part of the reason why it's grown as much as it has. We're going to talk about Automattic in a second, but he oversees Automattic in its whole slew of products, right? And purchasing products, creating products, doing all those things. He's not just WordPress. Automattic is not just WordPress. Automattic is a whole bunch. And then he has his own company, which I did list it. It's on the list. Audrey Capital. We'll talk about that in a moment. But Audrey Capital is investment side of the house. He just does a lot for WordPress and is always in the critical spotlight. Love it or hate it. That's the essence of it.
Yeah, I was looking and I have like 3 conversations with Matt Mullenweg in the post or in the WordPress Slack, and 2 of them are him being very mad at me because I was very publicly critical of him, or used to be a lot more. And then the third one is him asking if I would participate in the WP Tavern trial. So I think that to me is kind of a good picture of Matt, where if you say something negative about him, he'll message you and say like, you're wrong about this, this, and this. I think I was right, but he didn't. And then he, happily let me write for his blog. So, that he's a complicated guy, but yeah, I mean, he's always walking this balance of he owns WordPress. I feel like it should be clear. Like he really does. He's the release lead. He has the keys to everything. He hosts the infrastructure. He chooses who's the core contributors are and could remove their access. But he also needs the community. He needs the hosting companies to contribute. He needs the ecosystem, the plugins to exist. So he wants to feel like, hey, you're all in control. But then sometimes he does just make the hard decision or outline the vision, and you kind of just have to get on board with him or not. And I used to there's always these calls for this to change. And at the end of the day, I don't know that there's a better version of Matt Mullenweg out there. I think he's weirdly enough, maybe the best that, the best version of leadership compared to, I don't know, a committee or something.
Yeah. A committee or somebody on a power trip, which is, when you look at the Silicon Valley side of tech founders and, these guys and gals that just get uber wealthy really fast and have control of these types of platforms of this size, there is a lot worse things that could have been happening with WordPress. It's why I always say Automattic is the best steward. I do stand behind a lot of Matt's visions. I think that he is rightfully trying to carry open source first and foremost with WordPress forward as like the North Star to his vision. I mean, that's what I get, and I hope that's what it is, because that's the vision I'm behind. But then there's the critical ways of management, communication, and maybe features. I don't really complain too much about features and wanting more in WordPress, more than it is about if the community is so important, let's make sure that the community is being heard, right? That's generally, I think, the flag that I try to wave. But man, you don't see this guy posting pictures of here's my fleet of Lamborghinis,
Yeah,
here's this
true.
yacht that I'm on. There isn't, right? There isn't that, which is, I think we can be thankful for.
Yeah. I mean, if there was anything, I would love to see him stop doing 90% of what he's doing and use WordPress a little more and stuff. But, I'd love to see him be more engaged in WordPress, but if that's all,
Yeah,
that's not the worst.
I think one of the most telling things, if you want to analyze and try to get under the hood of his thinking and projections of WordPress, simply tune in to the state of the words. They're getting a lot more formal. They're getting a lot more visionary, I think, than maybe state of the words of the past. Used to always just happen at the end of WordCamp US, and now they're their own standalone event. This one's the one coming for 2024 is in Japan. The Media Core team invited, I think you as well, invited me, invited a bunch of people. No. Sorry, Brian. Yeah, you're on the end. You're on the end of the list. I am not spending, $20,000 to go to Japan from, taking the flight, a leisurely flight to Japan from where I am. But that's where it will be today. Those are the most telling moments, I think. Presentation, it's the Apple-esque event. It's probably how he thinks of it, and that's how I see it as well. Here's what we've done. Here's where we're going, and one more thing, right? That's what those events are for.
Yeah.
So those are the most telling, in my opinion.
That, and I think who he puts in charge of things, who he puts in charge of companies at Automattic, who he puts in charge of releases. So I think those are the, the key ways you can judge where he's going is by who he trusts, who he relies on. And the fact that that's in Tokyo, I think that's actually great, because if you look at the meetups and the WordPress events and stuff, I mean, Asia is killing it with events, much more than North America. There's so much going on over there in WordPress. You had the interview about Africa. These, WordPress is truly global. And so it is kind of cool that he's at least embracing that, even if he doesn't, even if the plane tickets are a little much.
Yeah, for sure. I have next on the list Automattic. And I'll skip ahead. I have Automattic products, WordPress.com. First, unpacking the Automattic layer first. If you could just go to Automattic, those of you watching, you can go to Automattic.com. You can see the laundry list of things that falls under the Automattic umbrella: WordPress.com, Beeper, Tumblr, Day One, WooCommerce, Jetpack, WordPress VIP, Pocket Cast, Akismet, Longreads, Newspack, Gravatar, and then we also contribute to a number of nonprofit and open source projects like WordPress.org, WordPress iOS, Android, P2, BuddyPress, BBPress, WordCamp US, WP Job Manager, 5 for the future. And now it's all coming back to my head, is why I wrote Automattic and then Automattic products, is because Automattic is that commercial entity, and even Automattic itself has to operate with this understanding that we also contribute to a number of open source products or projects. Because I think this is one of the harder ones for folks coming into the space to fully understand when they see sponsored contributors to WordPress who work at Automattic. There's like this disconnect. Well, isn't WordPress Automattic, and why are they getting paid, right? I think maybe it's just sponsored contributors. Sounds weird, I think, maybe for some folks. I always try to make it super simple. It's like if you run your own business and you go out to eat and you have your business credit card. Did you eat with you and your wife? Yes, use my personal card. Did you eat with you and a client? Use my business card, right? To pay for the meal, right? Automattic itself has to keep these things separate in order to, well, I would imagine for tax purposes and commercial purposes, to be like, here's the commercial side of Automattic, which are these products we're going to talk about in a moment. And then here's all the stuff we do on the open source side. Is there a tax benefit? I don't know.
Yeah, when you said that made me curious.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can write off. I think there's rules about software development in general, which is why the WordPress Foundation, which I don't remember if that's on the list, but they don't employ developers. They don't, So I don't know if developers can be written off.
Interesting. I know the WordPress Foundation, did I put that on the list? It is on the list. Doesn't have any employees, or the last I knew it has 0. I don't know if that's still the case.
I thought let's not skip it. Yeah, we'll come back to it.
We'll get to that. So Automattic, that's how I see it. Big global, or big umbrella of all of these things, not just WordPress, and tries to position itself as commercial company who also does a ton for open source WordPress. And then we have the Automattic products, which I've already outlined, and immediately, having just talked about Matt and all the stuff he's accountable for and overseeing, you're like, wait a minute. 1 minute I'm yelling at this guy because I want Gutenberg and I want WordPress to be better, but he's got this thing called Beeper, and he runs Tumblr, and there's Pocket Casts, like he's also in podcasting. Yeah, there's a lot of different Automattic products that actually don't even hit the list. Like I don't see, Simple Note is not even a standalone product on Automattic's homepage. Poor Simple Note.
Yeah, is Simple Note still there?
Simple Note's a fantastic tool.
There is like a thread under a lot of them. One is that a lot of them are open source, so like I switched to Pocket Cast recently to try it out, but that's open source. But the other thing is that a lot of what they do has WordPress underneath. So like WordPress.com obviously runs WordPress. Their whole internal communication is something called P2, which is a product that's a theme on top of WordPress. Tumblr is going to be running on top of WordPress. Day One uses the block editor, I believe, in some contexts. So it's starting to run parts of WordPress. So, in a sense, like there is a good reason why they can contribute so much to WordPress, because like they are, they're using it for internal tooling. They're using it for different products. It's kind of like a perfect scenario where they can work on something for themselves. If it's good enough, give it back to core, or reverse,
I was listening to, as I had to bring up a quote from my last interview with Matt 4 years ago at this point. At one point, Automattic had, or they still have it, it's happy.tools.
Yeah, Happy Tools.
Which is another, Happy Tools website, happy.tools. If you go to that website, it's a collection. You would almost think like, oh, is this competing against Asana or Todoist? Like, where did this one come from? And what I still just cannot wrap my head around is how this is prioritized across Automattic. Like, you look at this and you're like, wow, this could be amazing if it had 150 developers behind it, but it probably only has 2, right? Like same thing with Simple Note. Like you look at these things and you're like, wow, this could be so much bigger and better, but it's just a tiny little star in the Automattic universe.
Well, one is that he's said, that he sees Automattic more like a Berkshire Hathaway where he's investing, owning, it's like a portfolio, but so they do share a lot of resources. So there's benefits to all that. I forgot to mention Pressable as like another example in there. Mm-hmm. But I think the other thing is, and this came up in that clip that you shared of him, where he was basically saying, people get scared that they're going to enter a market and kick out everybody else. But like the reality is nothing from Automattic is the best in its category. It's all pretty good. I think Pressable's really good. WordPress.com's getting really good. I like Day One. I like Pocket Cast. But like, WooCommerce, Sensei LMS, all of these different things, they all have competitors. They all have, and there's not really very many Automattic products where you go, yeah, that's the best in its industry. They're all just like pretty good. Would be nice if they had like double the workforce, Yeah. It's definitely an interesting approach.
Tumblr, as an example, which coincidentally I didn't put on the list, but certainly as of this week, he put out the call that this is going to be the biggest migration on the internet ever, I feel, or maybe he actually said that, where they're going to turn all of Tumblr into WordPress. WordPress will power Tumblr. And I don't want to get into theory crafting that, but that is a great example of, for the last couple of years, you're wondering like, what the heck is he going to do with Tumblr? Like how is he going to either monetize it, turn it into a social platform? And to your point, with his quote of saying like, well, we're going to enter a market and we might not even get this product off the ground in a couple of years. I see that with, of course, Tumblr, even Pocket Cast. I'm so also deeply embedded in the podcasting space. There's so many features in Pocket Cast, so I'm like, why aren't they building this for the podcasting 2.0 open source side? There's so much stuff that they could be building in, and it's just a much slower pace, I guess, when you're under that Automattic umbrella. But maybe a safer space for product builders to go. I don't know.
That's in their Automattic creed, that I'm guessing Matt wrote, but it's, that they're just on a long time frame. I forget I don't know if you ever read the Automattic creed. It's like all the sentences that describe the company's philosophy, but there's one about just measuring things in years, they just measure their time frame in a long time. Like they're just not in a hurry. Automattic.com/creed. I will never stop learning. I won't just work on things that are assigned to me. I know there's no such thing as a status quo. I won't read the whole thing, but go to automattic.com/creed to understand that a little bit more. Which brings us to WordPress.com as a standalone product. I've been hearing this for years. Matt just wants us to build and invest in WordPress so that WordPress.com can get better, right? It's just free labor for him to improve his product, which he's just going to go sell onto his hosting. Man, I pay for $300 a year for the podcastsetup.com, hosted on WordPress.com. It is not any better than me building my own WordPress site, on Pressable or any other managed web host. But WordPress.com is the biggest. Well, I'm just guessing. I don't know the answer to this, but it is probably the biggest product that Automattic has to sell to the world. And that is what I would say is going to start to evolve to the air quotes best way to experience WordPress, because it does come with Jetpack, which is next on my list. But WordPress.com is a different way to experience WordPress, not only as a hosted product, but there are some things that are slightly different on the WordPress.com platform. You can get themes that are different on WordPress.com. Of course, Jetpack is there. There's the whole reader thing that we were talking about yesterday in WP Minute Slack. There is a different experience there, but it's still not like leaps and bounds better than your own self-hosted install, in my opinion. Yeah, WordPress.com, now it's kind of pivoting to being just another managed host by giving you all the developer features and the different plans and stuff. And I think one of the places where it was meant to optimize, and this kind of goes along with Jetpack, is, right now, if you spin up your own WordPress site, let's say you start adding pictures, videos, eventually you're going to hit bandwidth issues and your hosting company is going to get mad and want to charge you more and all that stuff. WordPress.com hides all of that. You can upload as much as you want. They don't care. You can put as many videos as you want. They don't care. You can, there's all these sorts of backups and revisions, and it's really streamlined. So it's really meant to be the user-friendly version of WordPress that hides all the complicated stuff and is just, I want to start my blog in 2 minutes. I can have myblog.wordpress.com for free and instantly start writing. And so they really are trying to solve a different use case, that kind of simple, person. And so I think that's what they're going for. That's what Jetpack's going for. But, because they're so spread out and these different areas, it all starts getting a little confusing because you go into WordPress.com and you're like, well, this says Jetpack. Does that mean I have to install Jetpack? But you don't, because it's actually built into it. If I, can I put this over here? Can I turn this plugin off? Am I even allowed to have plugins? People don't even know you can have plugins on WordPress.com. So I think the idea that WordPress.org is just funneling work into WordPress.com, I think is a little backwards. Honestly, a lot of the Gutenberg stuff that, I think you did the demo of the new page layout views and all that sort of stuff that's coming. That's been on WordPress.com for months, and they've been testing it and iterating it. And it's going to come into WordPress.org because the people in WordPress.com are using it, dogfooding it, getting it to be really good. But if you log into WordPress.com, you're going to see all that work that's going to make it to core. So I think it's a much healthier two-way relationship than I think most people maybe give them credit for.
I put in 2 bonus products here, and I'm not trying to extend it, so I'll try to wrap this up and frame this, because when I think of Automattic as the best steward for WordPress, Automattic needs to survive just like the rest of us do. We always talk about, hey, free versus, paid, freemium, especially in the plugin in theme space. You're just like, how, this is only $50 for a lifetime? You're crazy. How are you going to sustain this business? There's always that discussion in the WordPress space. But WordPress or Automattic needs to monetize as effectively and efficiently as anybody else. WordPress.com is one of them. I like what they're doing. Some of the things, when I analyze it as a business, something that kind of peeled off of that is the WP Cloud initiative, which is what I'll call hosting infrastructure in a box, where they can take WP Cloud and bring it to sponsor of the show, Bluehost, and say, hey, look, if you want your own cloud solution powered by all the stuff we already know from WordPress.com, all the challenges and growth in this stuff, we can do it. WP Cloud, I like that. And then Jetpack is that product that says, oh, you're not hosted with, this is just me as a labeling it, but you're not hosted on WordPress.com. Okay, we have this product which can be inserted into any website running WordPress on any web host. It's called Jetpack. It's your standard play on, here's a freemium product in the WordPress space, plug in with a bunch of things that it does, and run it for free. And when you're ready to upgrade through the normal routes. But it's the way to experience WordPress from Automattic, hosted anywhere. Then there's a Kismet, which is the spam protection, what I would call a wholesale play from a product perspective. You're not looking at that going, ooh, what does a Kismet have today? You're just like, oh, a Kismet blocks spam. I need it. Okay, I got comments, I got a discussion board. I need to block spam, and it's not sexy product, but it's you need it to run and block that. And they also have that. I don't have any idea how that product is doing. I don't know how any of these products are doing. I don't know what the revenue is or anything like that. I don't know how successful a Kismet is. So there's that. And then there's Gravatar, which you're always just it's just I can upload a picture of myself in WordPress. I think it could be a lot more. They did enhance Gravatar recently to more of that landing page bio kind of thing. Yeah. I would have imagined, if I had evaluated Gravatar a decade ago, I'd be like, oh, single sign on to any service anywhere. Just like when you go and sign up to a service, you're like, oh, I just sign in with my Gmail. I might do that with Gravatar. I guess this is that automatic creed of thinking in years, that product might be that in another 5 years, but there's no rush to get there with WordPress.
I think it goes back to what we were saying earlier, which is compared to other open source software, WordPress is easier. It's like it's supposed to be user friendly, not like most open source software, which requires you to be a hacker and developer. And so like Jetpack and all these tools like WP Cloud, things like, oh, how come my WordPress website doesn't send emails? Why aren't emails coming out of my WordPress website? Oh, well, you got to get a SMTP plugin like Gravity SMTP or something like that. Like that stuff is all the stuff that I think WordPress, that Matt is trying to solve with Automattic, which is like, I can make WordPress easy for everybody, hide the spam, Jetpack handle all, gives you stats, it gives you backups, does all this stuff. And I think in theory, it all makes a lot of sense. And you go, wow, you just made WordPress easy for everybody. And I do genuinely think that only recently in some interviews has Matt grappled with the idea that like a lot of people don't like Jetpack, that it's kind of has a negative reputation a little bit and that they're doing work to turn it around. And so it's definitely a weird place where there's, like you said with Gravatar, it seems like it could have been all these things and then it's just now starting. And WordPress.com should have been Substack, honestly. I mean, it should have been. It has all the same features, just not the user experience. But, so it's just, I don't know if it's just the fact that at the end of the day, they're also doing everything and then merging it all back into WordPress.org, which Substack doesn't have to do. They don't have to make every feature also available. And I think, that's a place where they should get a little bit of credit, that a lot of these things do feed back into the open source product, but it does make them not as competitive in all these different areas like single sign-on, like email newsletters, like what Jetpack offers, which is like managed hosting in a box kind of stuff.
Yeah, Jetpack certainly suffers from that branding and identity experience from many years ago. Originally, that's how, it's funny, we talk about the temperature in the room for the WordPress community these days. A lot of folks being like, why isn't WordPress listening to us? Why are they doing that? I'm right here. I've got the answers. Why isn't anybody asking me? I mean, we had that conversation when Jetpack first launched, because that was an era or an evolution of WordPress where there was a lot of critical views from Matt and maybe many others, I can't really remember, but certainly from Matt, where, hey, if you're selling that plugin, we don't really like that. We want free everything. And then, like, as time evolved, like Jetpack, the Trojan horse was rolled into the courtyard, and we're like, hey, look at this thing. Where did this come from? And maybe we started talking less about what, everything being free and open source and, truly kumbaya, to Jetpack being here and monetizing it, but while also competing with some of our friends in the space. So that was a huge concern. I mean, of course, there was technical challenges and then like upsell things that people weren't happy about where other people got criticized. So this is like literally 10 years of trying to like rebuild that brand persona with the community. And that's actually how that's how I had my first interview with Matt was when he said the growth of WordPress came from Jetpack. And a lot of people today are saying like, oh, the growth of WordPress came from all these website builders. Why isn't anybody listening to us? Well, this is the same debate I had a decade ago, except it was Jetpack and now it's humans. So yeah, anyway, long way of getting to like, there's all these products, takes a long time and we haven't seen them all fully play out yet, especially Gravatar, stuff like that. Did you want to say something? No.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, Jetpack is that perfect example. It was really meant for beginners and for people to just want to spin up a blog and publish and stuff. And if that was you, Jetpack was honestly really great for you. If you were in the business of making websites for people, it was not good. And that we're always going to debate which is the bigger / more important audience, the DIYers or the website builders.
WordPress.org. That's the next one on the list. If anyone watching this probably knows that's where you go to download WordPress, self-hosted WordPress, if you didn't get it from your web host. Probably search for themes and plugins, right? That's where probably most people touching the stuff think about WordPress.org. Yeah. Themes, plugins, and that's where I get it. This is a huge topic too, but trying to keep it condensed as much as possible. This is where I go also for what's happening with WordPress, the community, right? With WordPress.org/news, I believe, is where they post all of the
It's kind of the main blog, like new releases.
Yeah, it's not.
And
It's not
Josepha's
news.
podcast.
Yeah. Josepha's podcast. Oh, it is WordPress.org/news. Yes. So that's where you get all like the big stuff. Last post at the time of this recording is 6.6.1, July 3rd, 2024. This is where you're going to go for all the WordPress make teams, which I did not put on the list.
Make.wordpress.org. That's the whole thing. Yeah.
Make.wordpress.org. That's where you're going to go to see all of the different teams who are contributing in some form or fashion to WordPress. Those teams are really quick: core, design, mobile, accessibility, polyglot, support, documentation, themes, plugins, community, meta, training, test, TV, CLI, marketing, hosting, Tide. I don't even know what that is. Photos, Openverse, core performance, sustainability, media core. What the hell is Tide? Tide is a series of automated tests run against every plugin, theme, and directory. Is that a team or is that a robot?
Yeah, Tide. It's like security scans all the plugins. I don't know if that even still existed. Okay.
Yeah, it's there. It's on the make.wordpress.org team or page. WordPress.org is where you can get involved a lot more. There's just a ton of stuff. You can get more involved with WordPress there if you're looking to contribute, to talk with others, jump into the forums, answering questions, forums per theme and plugin. If that's something that you're into, you can get all of that stuff. And now enhancing the Learn presence or the Learn site at learn.wordpress.org. That's where you can go to learn all of these different facets of WordPress. Whether you're a developer or an end user, there's a bunch of material there. WordPress.org encompasses all of this open source WordPress movement. It's the best way that I can put it.
Yeah. And it's funny because how do I learn WordPress? Well, I can go to learn.wordpress.org and take courses. I can go to the WordPress.org handbook, basically, which is like the support guides that kind of show you, hey, this is what a block is. This is how to publish a post. You can go to developer documentation, and that goes a layer deeper. You can go to support forums. Yeah, there's a lot on that website. You kind of don't realize there's so much on that website. So much of it is forum software and social software. Like if you make an account, you have your own profile page on there, and it shows everything you've done in WordPress. If you own plugins, if you've responded in threads and all sorts of stuff, and there's an infrastructure to host something like probably 70,000 now plugins and deploy updates to them to half of the internet. So, it's that WordPress.org. I think people underestimate what it is and, what their server bills must be, because it's one of the most top, traffic sites. It's huge.
Yeah, it's like 118th, I think, last I checked, which it was a lot higher back in the day, but of course, there's been a lot more social media type sites. There's a showcase page, wordpress.org/showcase, which shows off the different ways that WordPress is being used around the web. Yeah, the community page. When you really start to unpack this, I mean, we're roughly 60% through the list that we wrote down, and there's still like a ton more that you can go to. And this is why like the fire hose of WordPress is so much. Like, there's just so much happening. Not only just, you look at WordPress.org and Automattic, just those two entities, if you call it that, has so much going on. Never mind all of the corporations and companies that wrap around this ecosystem that are also doing cool things with WordPress and giving back in some ways. There's always a ton of stuff. That's why, I don't know. That's why I'm on that crusade of like educating more people about WordPress, because it is an important piece of software and it's so much bigger than people realize and touches so much stuff that people don't realize. That's why you got to try to go to make.wordpress.org. And another thing I don't even have on this list is I think WordPress.org is the jumping off point for registering for the official WordPress Slack.
Yes. I think it's make.wordpress.org/chat, maybe, I want to say, something like that. And on top of it, that entire massive site, one of the top 200 visited sites, is right now being completely rewritten to use the full site editor. So as you go through it, half of it looks like it's from 2010, and then half of it looks really clean and modern, and it's literally using full site editing at that level of scale. And the people working on that, are doing it, then constantly learning and going back to WordPress, the software, and saying, oh, wait, we need it to do this, we need it to do that, So it's it's so many moving parts that if you want to go into it, I feel like you have to put on blinders and find one very small area that's really interesting to you, and then try to ignore everything else, because it's hundreds and hundreds of people every day doing things and asking for feedback and having discussions, and it's all there. You could waste your whole day of just following the Slack conversations and whatnot.
There's 3 other things that I just wrote down as I explored .org, things that we forget or take for granted. Is also, if you go to the community tab, you can pull up the photo directory, which are free photos. There is a photo team, not to be confused with under the extend menu or navigation item. There is the Openverse, which it was acquired, right?
Yeah, he bought it and donated it to WordPress. It was just like an alternative to Unsplash or Pexels with just a more open license.
I think I had the WP Minute at the time, or I was going with the WP Minute at the time. Search for Openverse, super quick. Oh, I don't see a headline of him doing that, but I started in 2021. I don't remember when he did that. But yeah, if you go to openverse.org, which you can link to off of wordpress.org, explore more than 800 million creative works. Images and audio are the 2 major filters you can apply to your search. But then there's the photo directory. Kind of weird that we have both. Is there a distinction? Like, do you know how they?
Openverse has other sources, I know. I wonder if the photo directory shows up in Openverse, though. It's a lot. I think this is a lot, but these are the results of passionate contributors too. And so I'm not sure why there's a photo directory, I guess, but I do use it sometimes when I'm doing like a WordCamp presentation. I'll go to it and I'll use the photos from it, and they've gotten really good at moderating it, so the quality's a lot better. The block pattern library, I don't know if that was on your list, where it's like a repository of patterns that's a community, contributed.
WordPress.org/patterns. Those are also the ones that show up inside the editor, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, because I see this centered image with 2-tone backdrop on every time I open it up. I'm like, I am never using it. Hey, it looks nice for a particular website, but I'm never using it.
Yeah, we turn it off on client sites.
Yeah. And then there's 5 for the Future, a whole initiative which we could spend an hour and a half talking about. The essence of it is, and this is what I tell people, when you look at when you say, why isn't WordPress where it should be in your world, in your mind, and the way you use WordPress, and then you look at it and you go, okay, this is open source, this is community. Why hasn't your local park been cleaned and all the equipment painted and trees trimmed? And you go, this is a local government. It takes a lot. Like, it's going to get there eventually. You got to go knock on the door and be a little bit louder and show up to meetings and make sure everyone's paying attention. That's like the same thing. That's the way that I see it anyway. It's largely the same thing here in open source WordPress world. And when you complain about or criticize why the project isn't there, 5 for the Future is one of those efforts to say, look at all the folks benefiting from WordPress. If you just volunteered 5% of your time, not funding, but time to back to WordPress, all of us would see an improvement across the board. And I think that's the flag. That's like the nice flag that Matt tries to fly and say, look, this is all open source. Automattic foots the bill for millions and millions of payroll dollars to WordPress.org. You can too with your little 5%. And when you take 5% from everyone that is benefiting from WordPress, it could be better. So don't just tweet about it or be like me and make videos about it or podcasts about it. Actually give back your 5% of time and this thing would improve. That's loose. I see 5 for the Future. And I know friends of the show, Brad Williams and Lisa Sabin-Wilson from Web Dev Studios, I know they do this every Friday. Maybe it's every other Friday.
It's like the last Friday of the month or something.
Last Friday of the month. That's the 5%. And they have web dev team, give back to WordPress however they see fit. Answering questions on a forum, writing code, fixing documentation, volunteering at an event. That's how you can make WordPress better. just a little bit.
Yeah, it's another one of those things where people, I think, maybe assume not the best intentions, so they get very critical of the Five for the future. But I think it's actually been helpful because it's put a little pressure. Like I know Automotive has hired some people to work full time. They just put a full-time employee helping the plugin directory. So these big companies that are profiting, they're definitely putting more time. I think WP Engine has Brian Gardner now being a lot more involved, and Damon Cook, and so it helps because I think, like you said, like these other companies could come in and they could put in a ton of resources, but it's a bit like local government. Like when you want to get that pothole fixed, well, you got to fill out the forms, you got to have the hearings, you got to let everybody comment on it for 2 weeks. Otherwise you're not being transparent enough. And you got to, so that balance between all the bureaucracy of how slow it moves to make decisions. But if they just went in and just said, nope, we're just doing all this stuff, people wouldn't be happy either. So local government is the perfect metaphor for open source development.
There's also a job board. So there's also a job board on WordPress.org. Funny enough, first job that I see listed here, migrate my podcast hosted on Castos onto my website. That's a place I used to work for 3 years. Maybe I should reach out to this guy and get paid $25 to migrate his Castos site. So also a job board if you want to search for jobs. Jobs.wordpress.net. Yeah. Audrey Capital. We'll move on from WordPress and move on to the next on my list, Audrey Capital. This is the investment arm, saying it slowly so I can type it in, Audrey, AUDREY.co. The mascot is an elephant, and the website looks like it was made in 2009. It's fine, works. But if you go here, you'll see the list of Audrey Capital is an angel investment and research company created by Matt Mullenweg of WordPress to help innovate and ideas grow. Here's just 2024. American Ostrich Farms. Sorry.
As you were explaining it in my mind, I was like, I feel like half of them are like a chicken farm or something, was the example I had in my mind. And then you said that.
Oh, God. Like I should be actually doing a podcast for just analyzing these Audrey Capital investments. American Ostrich Farms, Mini Circle. What does the CB stand for? Crunchbase. Yeah.
If you want to see the numbers.
Yeah, if you want to see the number. American Ostrich Farm, Mini Circle, Match Rubiel's Billion to One, Lumina Probiotic, Entava, Sparrow.Health, and Holy Me. That's just 2024 investments coming out of Audrey Capital, not investments or acquisitions made by Automattic.
Yes.
Two totally different things here. My head is exploding with how many brain cells does Matt have? How many active brain cells? This man has unlocked the ability to focus on so much. I know he has a team, but man, I know he's involved in a lot of this stuff. You can go down from 2024 all the way down to 2005 when it lists Automattic as the founder, on this list. So just a ton of different businesses and things that Audrey Capital is invested in. Audrey Capital also pays some of the employees on WordPress.org. Otto is one. Mm-hmm. I don't know of anybody else. Otto, I don't know anybody else on Capital pays. I'm trying to think on the WordPress.org side. And Audrey Capital also pays employees at WP Tavern, which we'll talk about in a second. Thoughts on Audrey? I mean, just a lot of stuff, man.
I think it's also that thing like when you're super wealthy and you just have to like have some sort of business front for all of your money. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I'm sure like, it's just where his accountant probably gets paid. It's probably all that sort of stuff mixed in with his investments and just random things that he pays for. And I feel like if you go down the list, there was definitely, I feel like some early ones where noticeable names or some decent exits and stuff. I feel like that I remember there being a couple standouts. But yeah, does seem a lot of like Matt met a guy at a party who, has a new health drink. So Matt gave him a small seed investment.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, for sure. 2021 was a banner year for amounts of investments, right? Or amount of investments. SpaceX was one. BitClout, the crypto social network. Really have to check in on that one. See how that one's going. Just a lot in 2021 and 2022. 2023, not bad. And maybe 2024 might be 2019 was pretty short too. Butler Health, Balloon Zero, Flour Plus Water Pizzeria. Flour Plus Water Pizzeria. Napolitan. can't believe he invested. Neapolitan Pizzeria in San Francisco's Mission District. If you want to start a restaurant, Brian, maybe, just maybe, Matt will invest.
I feel like, yeah. Did he have one of those, like, there used to be the trend of, like, was it Blue Bottle Coffee in San Francisco? And then, like, Google invested in them and stuff. You know, it was like, invest tech money into some sort of food chain and you're going to be the next Chipotle, I guess, maybe is the idea. He
did invest in Hint water in 2014, which was an early buy. And that's why I think you always see him with a Hint water bottle at WordCamps. And I actually like Hint. It's just freaking expensive. Audrey Capital. So if you want to add another layer to how much can he do, Audrey.co, which brings us to the WP Tavern, which has been the paper of record started by I almost called him Jeff Tavern, Jeff Chandler. Many years ago, I had him on the podcast when he sold it, had him on the Matt Report when he sold it to Matt Mullenweg. He was sort of the first blogging, him and WP Candy, not on the list, thank God. WP Tavern, he started blogging, really covering the WordPress news, and it has been a staple ever since. It's known as the paper of record for WordPress. That torch was then passed over to many other writers and editors on not many, but a handful more on WP Tavern, most notably Sarah Gooding, who really ran it as what you would say is a paper of record and has been a slow to get started again paper of record since her departure last year. You know, that's the quote unquote news source for WordPress, WP Tavern. Forums, podcasts, blogging. As somebody who covers the space, I want to see that sucker thriving because that means that there's a lot of interest in this stuff. And when Sarah left, I was like, oh boy, what's going to happen? Matt's either going to take that Audrey Capital money and hire the staff from The Atlantic or just go acquire The Atlantic and all of a sudden there's like this massive professional firm covering this stuff, or what we have today, which is a very slow trickle to get it back into life.
Yeah. And I haven't talked too much about it, that process of being in his little, they called it the Hunger Games trial of picking an author and stuff. But, at the end of the day, it's sort of like a public service, I guess, because it's not, there's no ads on it. There's no monetization for it. It's really, other than a site, I think it's hosted on like Pressable and it has a Jetpack subscription. Other than that, it's really just Matt out of pocket paying somebody to do it. And actually the person that he got, Josepha, she's really good and has a good ear for finding important things and bringing them out. So I'm really excited about that, but I don't even think it's like a full time. I think it's just, a small kind of as she can do it. So the Tavern, I just feel like that was for me. I remember when I first got started, I think Jeff had, Triple J as his co-host on the podcast.
Oh, yeah.
It was them two talking and, like I think of that and like Matt Report as these formative things of like learning about the WordPress community and stuff. And I think it was critical, but informative. And I hope that the new way people learn about WordPress, which is, I think, probably YouTube, I hope keeps that informative side of it and not just critical side. And when I mean specifically is about the business of WordPress, the apparatus, like you said, like the stuff around it, not just like, hey, here's a fun thing that's in a release, or here's how to, add a header to your site. The conversations about the direction of the project and how the companies in it are doing and what products are coming out, it was a nice balance. And so I hope we have something kind of close to that in the future.
Yeah, WordPress is massive. There's a lot of stuff here. A lot of people touch WordPress. Not a lot of people care about their WordPress as much as like people watching this and you and I. Hopefully you're here to explore and understand it a little bit more. But yeah, if you are interested of getting into the community, there is a ton of things as we've outlined. The largest interest though will still be how to do this thing with WordPress, right? And I think that's why, YouTube is really, seizing the day or seizing the moment. And I think blogs have just been crushed by search engines for monetization reasons. And now this, alleged takeover of AI, getting their answers through that. So which doesn't help because YouTube is a Google company. So, that doesn't make my, as a YouTuber, it doesn't make me super happy that I don't have choice of distribution and taking my videos and putting them all everywhere. Though I have thought about just putting them on Rumble, which is the only other platform I know that is an open video search. And who the hell knows? Like, who knows what happens to YouTube, and having it out there could be an advantage to these other platforms. Josepha Haden Champosi, WordPress Executive Director, or is it Executive Director of WordPress? I will link the interview I did with her a couple of years ago at this point. If you want to go deeper, I have her listed here because, well, she's the Executive Director of WordPress, and one would imagine when it comes to open source WordPress, I'll throw air quotes, second in command to Matt Mullenweg. So if there's a real issue or event like States of the Word, she's there. But if there's things happening with WordPress, one would imagine she kind of knows what's happening. She might not be writing the lines of code. She's definitely not writing lines of code, but she knows the pulse of the entirety of the project and the ecosystem around it. Just an important figurehead to know. And she also has is it briefing or the briefing?
WP briefing, maybe.
WP Briefing podcast, which you can also get at WordPress.org. Well, she'll do her fortnightly updates of what she's working on and where where WordPress is headed. Anything you want to add about Josepha?
I really think her domain is community and events, but she will sometimes when there was a hard decision maybe 2 releases ago that had to be made, and it was her, who collected the feedback and made the final decision on taking a feature out right before release. So she does have a place in the project, but she really seems right now, if you read her, she'll set these visions and all these things. And she really does seem focused on the community and the health of the open source contributors specifically, more than she's not going to, tell you what's going to be in Gutenberg. She's not, she's not quite that granular. I don't think her and Matt are. Either of them are.
WordPressFoundation.org. The WordPress Foundation is a charitable organization founded by none other, it doesn't say that, by Matt Mullenweg to further the mission of WordPress open source project to democratize publishing through open source GPL software. The point of the foundation is to ensure free access in perpetuity to the software projects we support. People and businesses may come and go, so it's important to ensure that the source code for these projects will survive beyond the current contributor base, that we may create we may create a stable platform for web publishing for generations to come. It's a 501(c)(3) nonprofit organization. The WordPress Foundation pursues a charter to educate the public about WordPress and related open source software. Also, the one that owns the copyright and trademarks of WordPress, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think that's all. They own the trademark, so they control if you can use the word WordPress.
Oh, the trademarks, yeah.
And they technically own the license to the software, but I think people think that they own WordPress, but they don't own the plugin directory or the theme, none of that stuff. They own, it's the source code and the trademark, I think. And then I think they're also the way that they can funnel donations to events, because I think there's a way where companies can donate to the nonprofit and then that money goes out to WordCamps, and that's how they fund WordCamps. I'm pretty sure that's the third function of it. It's a way to let you donate to a WordCamp as a charitable donation. I'm pretty sure.
Trademarks owned by the WordPress Foundation, wordmarks, the WordPress wordmark, the WordCamp wordmark, the BuddyPress wordmark, the OpenVerse wordmark, the WP CLI wordmark, and they show the 2 designs of WordPress, the logo, and the OpenVerse logo. Funny enough, the OpenVerse logo is up there. I don't know if it was in my interview or something I listened to recently where Matt said he keeps it to 0 people. That might have been when I asked him about running an official marketplace on WordPress.org. He's like, I would have to hire, I don't know how many people it would take to run that, but I don't know, minimally, you want to say 20 to 50 minimally to do something like that? And the foundation is just not set up that way. And I guess that's where the conspiracy theories come from. And, you go from critical point of view to conspiracy theory in a range. One could say, oh boy, how does WordPress.com and Automattic get to use logos and branding and verbiage. But if Matt Medeiros were to, register WordPressPodcast.com, I would either have to get, say yes from the WordPress Foundation to do that, or clearly just a no because they own that trademark, that word mark, and I would not be able to use it in a domain. That's where you can kind of get the critical view all the way to the conspiracy theories of this stuff, because Matt Mullenweg across the board on all of this stuff, for better or worse, and that is an open invite for people to say those types of things, to be critical or go all the way to conspiracy theory land. When it's him who started the foundation, it's him who owns Automattic, and it's him who's the release lead on the .org stuff, you're like, whoa, what's happening here?
You think I feel like he's even said recently that he's maybe not sure if it was the best decision to make WordPress.com, that it's maybe the one mistake. And it is like you said, it's that one thing people can really point to, because it is the most sort of unfair thing that he's given himself that competitive advantage over it. I think they kind of earn it personally. I think they kind of put enough back in where it doesn't bother me quite as much as it used to. But, in most open source software, the owner of the thing has a paid thing that they advertise. It's not that unusual. It's really not that unusual. It's really not that unusual to go to some other framework or something and see their hosted solution, like Ghost. If you want to use Ghost, I know you've used Ghost, right? Like it's open source, you can do it, or you can click one button and install. And honestly, that's probably to their advantage. And so I don't know. I get the conspiracy theory, but at the end of the day, like, it doesn't bother me as much. I don't know why.
Yeah.
I don't see it.
Yeah. And there's those types of things. Like, I don't know, when I went to install Ghost, I was like, I'll just run it myself. And it was like, step one, run Composer. I'm like, you know what? I'll just pay $300. I just, I don't even want to run these commands, copy paste into my DigitalOcean. I don't even want to do that. Just let me run it. And that's a very common, thing.
If they had a 5-minute install though, would you have done it?
Ooh, I would have tried. Have tried for sure. WordPress Foundation. Then what comes after that is WordCamps and Meetups. I put these on the same line. WordCamps, funded through the foundation from those donations. Is that where it goes? Is that so people donate or people sponsor and it goes into the foundation to go right to the WordCamps? I forget how that works. But the WordCamps are, these events that are, again, another thing that's critically being looked at. We're seeing less of them. We're seeing less maybe attendees. Meetups are the sort of standalone events. And my only points here is I think most of us in this room know what WordCamps and Meetups are. I think the technical stuff is how do we make them more engaging for folks? And this isn't, I think one of the critical areas of WordCamps recently is, when you go to a WordCamp, it's really just people in the industry already. There's not a lot of new people. And you know what? I'm hearing that also in podcast world, because that's not a real name, but Podcast Movement is an event that just happened back at the Gaylord in outside of DC. And a lot of people who went to Podcast Movement said the same exact thing, that the end users aren't showing up. It's just all industry people. So it really had me thinking, like, this is just going to be something across the board. Like, the average user of any software, is anyone going to anything anymore? If you're just like this average user who pays a few $100s a year to your WordPress website, are you going to spend $1,000 to fly across the country and stay somewhere to see this stuff? I doubt it. And whether that's a domino effect of COVID or just prices or interest, like, man, there's so much other things going on. I don't care about it anymore. Like, WordCamps and Meetups really have to figure out what's going to happen next to spur innovation.
Yeah, it's crazy because I think my first WordCamp was WordCamp Orange County, and that really changed my view, where I was like, oh, this is a thing. Like, I never even had been to a meetup, and it was definitely a thing where I went, oh, and like, it was the gateway into the community for me. So I understand the value of it. That said, like, from what I understand, there's a lot of work to put on, and it's getting harder, at least in North America, compared to, like I said, Asia and these other places where it seems like there's a WordCamp every weekend now. Like, you seem like there's so many, but I think in North America we're gonna have like 4 this year.
Yeah,
probably.
Yeah, it's crazy. Actually, it's funny. Not funny, I guess, but I just got notified that our meetup would get shut down. It's something that we haven't run locally here, but I'm in the same co-working space where we used to run it, and it really had me thinking, like, do I just say reply and say, okay, we'll keep it going, but also like having to deal with that, or just being like, you know what? Because we're in this co-working space, it's just like, I'm going to put on the projector one day and we're going to just talk about WordPress. Like, what's the difference? Like, what is the benefit I'm getting from an official meetup? And maybe those are the things that have to change in order to spur the innovation, right? Like, do we need all the red tape for meetups? I think at one point they used to like buy pizza. Back when I used to do it, they were like, oh yeah, we'll give you $100 for pizza or something, or whatever the number was for pizza. And it's just like, they don't do that anymore. So like, what's the point of having to go through the red tape when I can just get together with a bunch of folks and be like, you love WordPress? I love WordPress. Let's talk about it, and just run it that way. So yeah, definitely some bureaucracy things or red tape things that need to be adjusted.
I'm sure that, and the combo of the fact that so many people who 15 years ago were WordCamps or, meetups are 15 years older, and they probably have kids and, they got soccer practice to get to and everything. I mean, that's me. That's me. It's trying to imagine even every other week going, across the county to a meetup just seems unreasonable. But, hopefully a newer, younger generation would come and start, getting together, at least in some of the more like populated areas where, like in a city where there's a lot of people.
The fun doesn't stop, because the next item, and we're almost at the end of the list, is core contributors. I'm going to let you try to define that first.
Yeah, core contributors. That is technically anybody can be a core contributor, but no, let me rephrase that. Technically anybody can contribute to core, but to be a core contributor is to have a level of, approval that like most people don't have. So for example, I can contribute, but I can't even, if I raise an issue, I can't even label where the issue belongs. I can't say, hey, this is for this feature, this feature. I have to ask somebody else who's earned their way further in to come in and say, oh, this goes here, let alone I could never merge code into actual WordPress. So there's definitely layers of permissions, and there's a group of, less than 100 people who have like the total keys. And yes, a lot of them work at Automattic, but a lot of them are just people who have earned it, through working their way through the system, and they have the most knowledge and experience, and there's a reason that they're there. And that's the people making the ultimate decisions, but those are decisions primarily made by developers because they are developers. And then there's this other layer of leads and release leads and stuff like that. And I think that's where a lot of the tension we're getting these days are people who really struggle with the idea that at the end of the day, WordPress is like software, and it's decisions made by developers and what they can develop in a certain amount of time. And they want to see someone come in like a Steve Jobs and say, hey, we're going to have this feature, and everyone's going to work around the clock to make this new device. It's not that at all. It's people who've shown up and know the code base and can be trusted with it.
On paper, if you were to just pull up the GitHub repos for WordPress versus Gutenberg, because they are two different projects, if you've not heard that before, we're on the WordPress repo on GitHub, which is not where the development happens, we'll talk about that in a second, is 64 contributors, core contributors to the WordPress repo. These are the ones with the keys, the access to, commit these lines of code. It's a simple, I'll say simple, security and organization practice. Only these people can really commit this code to this massive piece of software used around the world. Compared to Gutenberg, which has 1,170 contributors on GitHub. That doesn't mean that WordPress doesn't have that many contributors, but it's the core contributors there who are the last mile of committing that code to the core, which gets shipped and delivered to web hosts and desktops around the world. That's the number that we're at after 20 years or so. And that's not even how many are currently active, those 64. That's just, I guess, over time since they created the WordPress.org repo on GitHub. But I just saw Andrew Nason's face there. I mean, I don't think he's doing that anymore these days. So yeah, I mean, you can't go back to 2021 was the last few lines of code, I think, if I'm looking at this correct, from Andrew Nason into WordPress.org. I don't even know if that's right. I might be looking at the wrong thing. Anyway, point is, not that many people as when you compared it to Gutenberg. This will parlay into GitHub versus SVN or Track and Make on WordPress.org. The development of WordPress happens elsewhere, right? It happens in a technology called SVN. Am I getting that correct?
Yes, but they have updated it where if you want to make a change to WordPress, you can actually do it in GitHub, and it copies over the code and makes it like a commit in Track. So
it will appear in Track. So you can do it there, and it will appear in Track.
Which I don't think enough people know, because I didn't know that. But
yeah,
you can actually do that now.
And I asked Aaron Jorbin was on the previous WordPress YouTuber meetup that Ann McCarthy hosted. And we talked about that. I had asked him if he could share like how all of that. So the difference is, though, just make sure I get this right. The communication still happens over on Track. So while you might be able to commit that code there, you're not going to see the conversation like you and I did when we got our feature for Gutenberg in there. All that communication is going to be in Track.
Yeah, pretty much.
And that's just like, God, it's an ugly system, right? And I think for most people, GitHub is a lot easier to browse through and read through than maybe Track, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, but when you asked, he gave a good answer, which was that with Track, I think they own the code. Like I think it's open source in the code. So when they say, hey, we really want it to do this or that, they can just go in and change the code. Whereas GitHub, it's like, it's GitHub's code, and you just have to hope they add a feature. So I kind of understood it more when he said that, and I was like, I guess that makes sense. But that's an ugly website. Yeah,
and it just adds. It's just like another layer. Like if all the communication happened on GitHub, and even for the beginner person, even that might be too much for people. But at least it's like it's not that bad. And I think that just adds like that other layer. Like, oh, we're doing all this stuff. Even if I can convince, this is what I've been doing. I've been trying to convince people, you too, getting people to write their thoughts into a GitHub issue, right, with Gutenberg. And like as a creator and somebody trying to get people into the space, I think GitHub's like a good. Okay, you got to learn it. You got to get a little bit technical, but it's doable. But then all of a sudden you're like, after you get that person over that hump, you're just like, oh, and you want to do the WordPress thing? Head on over to Make, get up your profile, get into Track, and look at that. And they're just like, what? Like, I just did this. So it's just like, man, if we could centralize it all, it'd be great. But I totally understand why we're living in this duality of Track and GitHub.
Well, you had Derek Hansen on a previous episode that people should watch, and he talked about how he had an idea. So he went to GitHub and he made the request. And then I went in and found his request because I wanted to chime in on it for him. And just because that's another thing is if somebody requests something, you just go in and add a comment and say, hey, I'd like this too. And that's really helpful because they actually really do consider that. If nobody says that on an issue, nobody reads it. So I went into that. And then I also said, oh, this actually is really a core thing you need. You might want to do it on Track because that's where it would go. Somebody else went in and commented right after me and said, hey, actually, this is on Track as a request. Here's a link to it. And, it was very friendly. And yeah, technically he started in Gutenberg and he should have started it didn't matter because everybody helped it out and found the issue and pinned it all together. So it's, if you can just get in there and just make an issue, but this idea now that, well, I recorded a 2-hour live stream about it, so come watch my live stream if you want my feedback. I mean, to me, that's mind blowing. You got to meet people halfway. You got to get it in. There's a lot of advantages to putting stuff in writing for translations, for people who don't speak English, for people who aren't going to be able to watch a 2-hour video where you ramble about a bunch of other things. There's a real reason why getting your ideas down in writing and putting them where they're going to get read is a lot more valuable than, hey, you could just watch my live stream sales pitch. That's not gonna help get your ideas, adopted, in my opinion.
Speaking of 2 hours, we're at the almost hour and a half mark, and I've saved the best for last, which was not on the list I originally sent you because again, it's one of those things I thought of right when we hit record. This is a big one. This is Woo themes to WooCommerce. A very pivotal milestone in the, in the WordPress history books, is just another beast, which we could be talking about forever. But for those that don't know, Woo Themes was just an independent WordPress theme shop. They created WooCommerce by forking, was it Jigo Shop? Am I getting that right?
Maybe. I don't know.
I think that was like the controversy of the times back then. I think it was Jigo Shop. Let me make sure that's just not another independent platform. Jigo Shop WooCommerce. I'm like Joe Rogan. Let me look that up in the middle of me saying, let me just make sure that's right.
I mean, that's a common thing because what's the Buddy Press? Buddy Press is like the social network, but there's Buddy Boss, I think, that Automotive just purchased, if I'm correct. But that's another, they took it and they forked Buddy Press and just said, hey, we're going to make it better. And it became like a product. So yeah, that is a thing that happens in open source.
Yes. So in August of that year, WooThemes, 2011, August of that year, WooThemes forked the plugin into WooCommerce and caused quite a stir. So yeah, the WooThemes company forked Jigo Shop into what's now known as WooCommerce. Tried to be just Woo, but I think now it's back to WooCommerce. And then Automattic purchased it at some other time. In 2015, Automattic acquired WooCommerce. And WooCommerce, like, in the world of debating WordPress's popularity as a CMS, you often see like, well, look, the only one that's growing is Shopify. And okay, right from the outset, people just think, oh, WooCommerce or WordPress, Shopify competes against WordPress. But man, it's a whole independent, well, I see it as a whole independent project. Maybe I'm wrong, but I see WooCommerce as this thing that needs to grow and build and innovate just like WordPress is, in my opinion. Obviously, there's crossover, but when you're running an e-commerce store, there's just way more things you're thinking about other than posts and pages and comments and blocks for editing content. Now you're talking about running an e-commerce store. That is a massive thing, and that is also under the Automattic umbrella, WooCommerce is, as a commercial product and an open source product. And it's the 800-pound gorilla in the room that's like, yeah, I haven't even really seen it come to life yet. And I would imagine if I'm Matt, I'm looking at that going, when will you grow up? Like, when will you be earning money for the household here? Not that it isn't, but it's just, no way anyone just goes, Shopify or WooCommerce. I think a lot of people are just like Shopify, or hell, even Wix e-commerce, when you're just like this end user business person. Like, you're not looking at WooCommerce. You're just like, I'm staying away from that. I'm going to use this easy thing, even if they're charging me 20% of all my revenue.
WooCommerce is a perfect example of all the things we talked about because it's, number one is it is something that feeds back into .org because a lot of features you're seeing now are being contributed by WooCommerce engineers, like people they're seeing things that they need in Gutenberg for a nice experience and they have to get that into core. So it does kind of has that feedback loop of WooCommerce contributes back into core a little bit. It's the same thing where he's trying to offer the easy solution for e-commerce, but it's also open source. And if you remember last year where they tried to put a button right on the homepage of WooCommerce, one click, you'll go straight to your WordPress.com e-commerce store, that one click setup, and they had it was there. And the community was not super thrilled with that because there's other hosting companies that also, need to support WooCommerce. There's all these other things. And it's that fine line that he's keep walking of like, trying to make the easy solution, but I'm also trying to make the open solution that makes everybody feel like they get to be involved and be stakeholders. And just like WordPress.com, it's got its own little private marketplace for people to sell things on and stuff like that. So it seems like it's almost like a mini WordPress in it, just is having all the same struggles. It's too complicated. Features aren't coming fast enough. People want it to be one thing that it's not. People want it to be as easy as the proprietary solution when it's not. People want it to be easy for DIYers, but it's actually better for big, complicated stores. Like it's all the same problems, just in another little copy.
Yeah, 100%. An hour and a half of all of the things that Brian and I thought were the most important things. Hey, we're the ones making those decisions. We're bring up the most important touch points, waypoints, milestones of WordPress, people, pieces of software, products, concepts in the WordPress space. Hopefully, if you watch the whole thing, congratulations, amazing stuff. Thumbs up if you like the video, of course. Thanks for watching the video. Thumbs up, subscribe, leave a comment below. Subscribe to the WP Minute, thewpminute.com/subscribe.